You're watching Bloomberg Markets. I'm David INGLES here in Hong Kong.
I'm Rashad Salamat. Let's get to the Philippine economy. We've got a currency there, the peso at a 13-year low. We've got consumers now hurting even more from what is arguably a brewing inflation crisis. We've got a sentiment index which contracted for the first time in more than 2 years. It's a worrying signal in a country where it's actually private consumption. What did it make up? Something like 70% of
two-thirds of output. For a developing economy, that's actually quite rare. I mean, it works in good times and bad times. Obviously, it doesn't work quite well, especially with inflation on the way up. Let's get more on this. Headed back over to the Milk and Asia Institute, where Juliet is with the CEO and the heads of one of the country's largest conglomerates. Jules.
Yes, I certainly am, Dave and Rish, and I will be asking Jaime Zobel de Ayala about all of those concerns that you just mentioned there about the overall Philippine economy. We've just also heard, Jaime, thanks so much for joining us, but we've just also heard from the central bank in the Philippines saying that they won't be holding any off-cycle rate hike before their September 27 meeting. But amidst all these headwinds of this peso falling through 54 to the dollar, inflation at this 9-year high, of course, consumer confidence dented as well. Do you think that the central bank needs to act further?
Well, I think the central bank has its tools. There's both a supply and demand side to the equation. I'd just maybe like to correct the statement on the consumer demand side. Actually, consumer demand for the first half of the year, despite inflation, has grown about 5.4%. So it's actually not been too bad considering the inflation. I think the central bank has a role to play with rate hikes. Personally, I'd be in favor of a rate hike to shock the system a little bit. But at the same time, there are other areas that affect, I guess, the inflation equation. You've got rice prices that have been a little bit too high, and you've got fuel prices that have been high. They're a big component of the basket in the Philippines, and that's what's been driving inflation a little bit. I think the government's tackling the rice issue as well. If they can bring those prices down through liberalization of importation, it'll also help the equation.
How worried are you about the peso, though, weakening to that 54 to the dollar level? This is obviously a story of broader EM contagion and a stronger dollar effect, but it does play very much into the hands of how much money consumers have to spend.
No, that's absolutely right. There's that element, but also there's one part of the equation that I think people haven't understood. The Philippines has really been traditionally a consumer demand economy. It's really the consumers that have been driving our economy. But in recent years, the capital spending component of the budget, which has led to a deficit, has been very strong. Capital spending is about 30% of GDP, higher than it ever has been. When you have that kind of an equation, you start to import goods in bigger quantities. So there's been a lot of demand for dollars as well, but it's been going to a productive source, which is long-term capital. So in the end, if it's looked at from that point of view, that's not too bad a situation to be in. Of course, we'd like all of these elements to be tempered, and that's why you have a central bank, and that's why you have a fiscal side as well. But some of the elements come for reasons that are not totally benign.
2017 was certainly very much about synchronicity in terms of EM countries growing in line with global economies, but we're seeing such a divergence now. How much of an impact is that having on your business or your investment opportunities? Are you worried at this point?
We're still primarily a domestic-driven business, so a higher interest rate environment obviously would affect us. But I think all countries within Southeast Asia look at each other from a competitive point of view. Currencies will adjust to these changing circumstances to remain competitive. But from our point of view, we're still primarily a local company, although we have investments abroad. It's really a higher interest rate environment that would have an effect on this. This is managed. It depends on the size of your balance sheet, how it's structured. We're primarily a Philippine peso borrower. We do have some dollar exposure, so the foreign exchange doesn't really affect us. And it all depends on how high interest rate goes. We're primarily in the real estate business. Interest rates and mortgage rates do have an effect on our business. But so far, for the first half of the year, our real estate business grew by over 17–18%. So far, no effects.
So let's talk about some more of your investments. There seems to be a lot of airport proposals on the table at the moment. Why should the government pick yours? How superior is it compared to San Miguel?
Well, I think I can't speak for San Miguel. I think the government has given them, I guess, an opening for them to continue to build their operation. Our consortium are really a grouping of people who believe that we can rehabilitate our national airport. It's centrally located. There are a lot of pieces of infrastructure that lead up to it. It's perfectly geared for the future to handle the kind of volume that's needed. But, currently the capacity of this airport was for 35 million people, and we now have 42 million people coming into the Philippines. We believe that by 2020, we can take that capacity manageable up to about 45 million with some relatively small changes, putting capital, readjusting, creating some flow between the terminals. And I guess our group believes that, this is something that can be done within a relatively short period of time. It's a 15-year concession. It's not forever. And we'll see what the government decides to do after that. But certainly for now, we can make a difference.
Jaime, one final question. We do have an interesting story on the Bloomberg today talking about the impact of the Philippines being potentially in the eye of two storms, if you like, right, because we do have this typhoon bearing down as well. Any concern there to impact of your businesses, perhaps water, telecommunications, for example, and how buffered are you for a crisis?
Resiliency is a big thing. We get hit by typhoons on a yearly basis. I think the government has taken it seriously. There's been a lot of advanced planning. From what we can see, the typhoon is hitting the north of the Philippines, so it's really the province of Ilocos that will be affected. But it will affect telecommunication facilities and some of our energy-related projects. I think most people also don't know that our private sector in the Philippines has formed an independent consortium to handle resiliency and disaster relief. So we have formed a grouping around the foundation, the Philippine Disaster Relief Foundation, separate from what the government's doing. So I tend to think we're quite organized as a private sector community and ready to help the government in anything that might need.
Jaime, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Jaime Zobel de Ayala, Chairman and CEO of Ayala Corp from the Philippines.